Hi, well, thank you again for joining us. This is season 3 of the Dozuki Workshop series. I'm your host today, Eric Doster. I'm also going to be joined by our guest, Shumin Chen from Shufrans TechDocs. We're going to be discussing simplified technical English. Shumin's on the line with us right now, and she's actually joining us remotely from Singapore. Shumin, can you hear us?
Hello, everyone. I'm speaking from Singapore, so it's very early morning here, and I believe it must be late morning over there. Yeah.
Yeah, we're over on the West Coast, so for us it's about 11 a.m. For you it's about 2 a.m. So much appreciated for coming and joining and sharing your knowledge with us today. We're excited to learn about Simplified Technical English and what it can do for us as businesses looking to reduce confusion and cost.
hmm
So quickly, let's discuss a little bit about where we're going as far as the roadmap today. So we're going to talk about what is STE, Simplified Technical English, why use it, where does it have value, add value to your company, some examples of it in action, some before and after cases as far as what you'd see. And then the results from a management perspective more, probably. What is the benefit of using STE across your operations? And then for those of you who are interested in really taking the next step with STE, continuing your STE journey. So what does that look like? What resources can you refer to? Maybe some training you guys can get.
Yes, I would like to make use of this opportunity to share our experiences in the field of simplified technical English with you, especially seeing how this international standard has helped to make the creation and management of global documentation a little bit less of a headache.
Mm-hmm.
Simplified technical English used to be known as Simplified English, and the official name is this wonderful acronym ASD STE 100. So all three to me mean the same, and we are talking about the standard based on practical experiences over the past 10 years in many different industries. And I think before we start, there is a poll that we can quickly dive
Yeah,
into.
good segue. So, we have a quick poll we wanted to launch just to kind of see where you guys are at. Some of you might be familiar with STE, Simplified Technical English. Maybe you come from
hmm
an industry that's more comfortable with it or is starting to use it. Maybe you've never heard of it. So we just want to get a sense of where the audience is at with regard to that. So we're going to let that poll run for about a minute or so, and then we'll share the results once we've felt like the majority of you guys have answered. But yeah, STE, as Shimon was mentioning, seems to be quite cross-industry, no?
Yes, it is. And actually, my first customer was from the cancer therapy um, um, field that they
Hmm.
make machines, medical equipment to implement cancer therapy doses to their patients. So surprisingly, it's not just aviation and defense, aerospace and defense. It's a little bit more than that.
Yeah,
You
so
will
I
be
think that
surprised.
you're going to want to cover, it seems like, a little bit of what's what the reasons you might be wanting to, as a business,
hmm
embrace STE, try STE out, because clearly it's not just something that's being forced upon you in certain industries. Other industries are starting to adopt that or adopting it already, and I'm sure you're going to cover a little bit of those reasons.
Yes, so just to talk a little bit about this slide here, I'm sure most of us will be familiar with this kind of juggling act. We have business requirements to take into account on top of your daily regular workload. Just getting the work done is not quite enough. There are various considerations such as time to market, or as the case may be, downtime. Of course, we are all forced to cut corners and save costs wherever possible. And at the same time, we want to be less dependent on specific suppliers. So this means a continuous juggling game where we're going to try and keep everything in balance. Yeah.
Yeah,
So if we
absolutely.
can,
It sounds like there's definitely you know, uh, a lot of common reasoning in there for why you would want to potentially, you know, because I'm assuming SE is going to benefit you with a lot of those requirements that you just mentioned as far as common need for a business.
hmm
Just to quickly touch base real quick with our poll, it looks like we had the results there. I was noticed that a good number of you guys are not familiar at all with ST, so this is a good crash course for you, for those
Okay.
people. So just so you know, Shuman, a lot of the audience has not heard of STE. Some
Okay.
of it, it seems like, are vaguely. So it's about 40% are in the camp of not heard of it or heard of it just a little bit, and the very small percentage of that are actively trying it or currently in production with it. So
Okay, that's actually very good news for
yeah.
us at Shufrans and at Dozuki because it means that you won't get bored uh, by Eric and I. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Well, if you see what you get um, at the fast food restaurant and what you see on television, there is always like a gap between the ideal and also reality. So of course, the ideal case is to get our projects finalized on time, within budget, and with the right quality, and without any further compromises. We want to be able to do the work or get the work done our way. And of course, to engineers, I'm sure there are a few in the audience. It makes a lot of sense to use standards whenever possible
Hmm.
in order to achieve similar results. So but surprisingly, in the field of documentation, it still happens that standards are not highly regarded. Upper management and people who basically sit on our budgets and who make the decisions for us, they do not always have the same kind of regard for documentation that we know is very well deserved and very, very necessary. Actually, in this respect, the European Union specifically states in its regulations that documentation is an integral part of your product. So documentation is a very essential item, and it always comes at, guess what, the last moment.
Hmm.
Documentation always kicks in when product is already late and we are already over budget for this product lifecycle, and we just need to cut corners or are expected to do so. So Eric, if you could show that on the next click, what we are trying to do at the end of the day is, can we go back to the previous one? And one click, yes. So if we cannot get close to the ideal that you only see on advertisement, then at least we want to be proud of what we do and stand behind what we do, making sure that at the end of the day we still deliver a quality product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I mean, so why simplified English? Why go this route? What are the benefits?
So how do you think? I mean, one of the questions is, yes, why simplified English? How does simplified English potentially help us to achieve this? And why, for starters, do we need simplified English? Well, it consists of two words, simplified and English. Why is it English? As I believe the audience are mainly located in North America, so it should come as no surprise that it should be in English. But elsewhere in the world, we have to explain this because actually there are three times easily as many native speakers of Mandarin Chinese than there are native speakers of English. However,
Wow.
Chinese doesn't get me or us very far outside East Asia, so English is a much better choice because it is actually the language that has the highest penetration into other continents. And English also, well, having said that, we know that English it can be a very global language. We can find English speakers in almost every country, but their understanding of English could be very different from ours and may actually be limited. So
Yeah, they might
English,
not be native speakers. It might be something that they learned over the course of, school or whatever. So yeah, makes sense.
mhm. And also it's I need to stay on the previous slide because we still need to address the fact that English is a very rich language,
Hmm.
meaning that amongst other things it has a huge vocabulary and it has about three times as many words as in French or German. But in these languages you can say just the same things that you can say in English as accurately. So this implies that English has many redundant or ambiguous words. There are too many words with the same or very similar meanings. Also, we're not trying to show off our literary skills in technical communication. We're not writing poetry. We're not writing literature. It's not about Shakespeare. It's really about informing your audience, the user, whether he is a consumer or engineer, or a maintenance
Yeah.
technician staff in a hospital. It doesn't matter whom we're talking to, but if we have a message for them, it should really go without saying that we want to be understood and
Yeah.
using language as a means to communicate this
So it's more
information.
about being like Hemingway than it is Shakespeare, right? More about being clear communicators.
Yes, and anyway, I prefer Hemingway anytime over, over Shakespeare. So yeah,
So let's talk about some problems that you say it's a very rich language. That's a very interesting, 3 to 4 times the number of words, in the dictionary, or at least in used in English than in those other languages. I can understand how that, allows us to be a bit more flowery or unnecessary with our
yes.
language. So let's talk about that. What are the problems that you see from a communication standpoint with standard English?
Well, think about this example that I'm going to read to you. Round the sides of the round cap. If it then turns round and round, as it circles round the casing, another round of checks is necessary. We do find that many readers, many users of documentation get confused at times, and it's no wonder
Yeah.
because part of the information is not being conveyed in a very clear or easy to understand way, and language can be a part of that. So the use of confusing words, ambiguous words, or in that example, the same word for different things, they all contribute to confusing your users, and therefore he's going to need more time to read and hopefully still understand what we are trying to tell him. Of course, as you see in the cartoon here, it can easily prompt him to get annoyed, frustrated, call a help desk, or even worse, not to buy any products from the same company anymore. So, a potential
Hmm.
loss in your supplier status. And yes, it can come even worse. He could actually be exposing himself to safety risks.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could imagine a lot of situations where things are, being misunderstood by someone
Mm,
who's not familiar with that language. It's not their native language. I mean, we deal with this in the States with having people that are building product that aren't familiar with English as their native language, that they might be confused by the word. So I can see that situation coming up a lot where it's a common concern. The redundancy, the potential round and round example that you had, where you're interpreting that
yeah.
word incorrectly because you think it's a certain context and it's not.
Well, there's nothing wrong with using the word round, but in that example, probably the word round has been used one time as a verb, twice as a noun, other
Yeah.
times as an adverb. So it can be pretty, uh, it's not appetizing to even read or try to digest language of this kind, I would
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
So how does that affect translations then? With that.
Okay, interesting question. So if we move on to the next slide, a very important driver for the initiatives that have been around to simplify English, to try and do away with the complex aspects of standard language, has been translations. So translations, why? Because it is a highly complicated process. There is a very important reason why we have to consider translations. We need an ever increasing number of translations, and they are, as such, very definitely very expensive. So, translation cost is a very important impetus for attempts to standardize, simplify the English language as the source of for translation. So apart from the costs, there is also a quality issue. Of course, there are bad colleagues, there are bad drivers, and of
Hmm.
course, there are
Sure.
also bad translators. The many bad translations, however, do not necessarily point to a person or a translator who is not suited for his job, because you can have many perfectly valid English sentences that make a lot of sense, both from a technical and linguistic point of view, yet are impossible to translate into other languages without some genuine doubt. A simple example is the sentence replace the gasket. So does replace the gasket mean replace it, as in take the old gasket and put it back into place, or does it mean take replace, as in to discard the old one, take a new and identical item, then fit it in place of the old part? Especially when it's written, because you don't hear the intonation. It's a tricky one, even
Mm-hmm.
for native English language readers, because they can be very, very fluent in English, but they have a problem understanding you here, because the word replace, unfortunately, in this case, has two very distinct yet valid meanings.
So what I'm
So,
hearing you say, Shumin, is then, uh, you know, part of the problems with, standard English, in the translation of your English to whatever your destination language, can't necessarily be, you can't necessarily blame the translator all the time,
no,
because it,
no,
it could be very ambiguous as far as what specifically you mean in that context, right? Um,
exactly.
one thing I read about when I was looking into STE a little bit more is that sometimes it seems like the goal isn't necessarily translation or to get it to where it's more easily translated. It seems like sometimes the goal is to potentially make it so that the end user is comfortable learning to be able to function within STE. So they're trying not to translate it, but trying to get them to be comfortable within that narrowed, limited, controlled English. Do you see that where it's not necessarily translation, but it's trying to get them to use the English version instead because it's learnable more quickly?
Okay, so your question is, it could be translation independent of translations, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's just one way to help people get used to a more simplified way of communication. That's correct. So for companies who do not need translations, they already document things purely in English, then the use of simplified technical English is more straightforward. It's basically something that I would address. So forgive me if I keep it very brief.
Sure.
It's really something that they want their writers to all sound similar. You can't walk away with five manuals from the same brand and all five manuals sound like they came from five different people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's one of the reasons why, the other reason besides translation, that people turn to STE in order to standardize the brand, to keep the branding consistent. So that could
Mm-hmm.
be part of your branding strategy.
Okay, well, let's move on. I think you had one more point about the problems with standard English.
Yeah, so ultimately, translation quality definitely suffers when your language is not standardized, whether it's ambiguity or the lack of consistency in your source text. So we're moving on to other problems of standard English. So if we have problems creating, understanding, translating, publishing, delivering our documentation, our product information, it means that time to market or downtime, the time that your product is not going to perform the way the user wants or needs it to perform, then that means you're losing big money.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, simplified English, as you're going to see, it came from the aircraft industry. Your average passenger aircraft costs you a few hundred million, or costs the company a few
Mm-hmm.
$100 million. Any hour that it's going to sit on the tarmac rather than to be in the air where it was supposed to be actually means a lot of cost to the airline. It is hardly any different with medical equipment, and we can draw parallels in just about any other industry. We just want to make sure that our product serves the purpose it is supposed to serve as efficiently as possible. And we don't want to waste any time. We don't want to waste any money.
Yeah. So to sum up,
So,
basically, you're saying
um,
documentation is super important to try and control that
yes,
uptime, that availability.
yes, and just still on this slide, I also note we also know that many products require training for engineers or service staff, for users, for operators, and of course, technical documentation normally forms the basis for training materials. Again, if your training materials or technical documentation have complex language, it is going to make it more difficult to get the message across. So training will take more time, be less effective, and therefore affects the usability of your product. And also, if people do not do their tasks correctly, it can easily lead to damage to the product, probably even worse, injury to the user. So we don't want to be involved in anything of the kind. Damage to the product is bad enough. A wounded or a dead user is definitely very bad news for any company. So safety issues, liability issues, they increasingly play a role, and there have been quite a few occasions where documentation has been blamed for accidents or multi-million dollar lawsuits. So human factors are a big issue when it comes to safety, and we try to limit this with the use of good documentation.
Absolutely.
So I believe we're ready by
Yeah.
now for a quick poll.
Yeah. Another quick poll, real quick. So we wanted to figure out, what types of documentation you guys are in the audience are more familiar with, or what you're trying to create. So whether that's service repair, MRO type of activities, training, just general kind of training documentation. Maybe it's manufacturing instructions within the production environment. Maybe it's your end user support, your customer product support. So we'll do that quick poll. We'll give it a similar amount of time to kind of get a sense of where the audience is at, and then we'll come back to those results. In the meantime, we got a couple questions from the audience. Are there any guidebooks? So this is, I think, one for me more, but we'll ask if there's any resources. Are there any guidebooks or downloadable documents for STE? That's Tyler from the audience. So, Shumin, I know you were going to mention some training resources for people,
Yes,
self-starters,
yes.
to get started with down the line. Do you have anything that you want to mention now, or do you want to save
So
that for later?
the quick and dirty way of answering it is that yes, definitely there will be, but we need, please bear with us for a few more minutes and we'll quickly move on to those free resources. Thanks,
Sounds
Tyler.
good. Sounds good. So let's see where that poll is at just real quick. And real quick, I saw there was someone who was asking, can you give me a list of approved STE words? Is there a standard list
Yes,
that,
there are. There
yeah, is
are.
that industry specific, or is that something that is just within the
I'm coming just to that in a
okay.
few slides. Yes.
So the person in the audience who was just asking that, we'll get to that point in just a second here. So real quick, just to touch on the poll, what types of documentation are you creating? It seems like a good, healthy of us are just involved in training guides, so just general training for your employees. Manufacturing instructions seems to be the second, which is common usage of Dozuki, so I understand that's a big part of our audience. And product support, so maybe if you're coming from more of the repair, installation, putting that in front of the customer, that seems to be the third, and then the service and repair being kind of the last. So it's kind of a nice even balance, but training guides in
Yes.
general is kind of
I
the
think training
primary one.
guides are too important. I cannot stress it any further
Mm-hmm.
because if you have high turnover or just regular turnover in a company, chances are when new people join, they have to struggle with training guides. They have to read five, six times before they digest it. And even if they try to get support, probably the writers who created those guides might not already be there. So it's important to get this in place and get it organized and structured.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
I know you
so
have an
shall we
example
move
for
on?
us.
Yeah. So this example, it's an American company that makes powerful tools. So just a few weeks before Christmas, a number of years ago, they withdrawn a saw bench from all the shops where it had been rolled out with a big advertising campaign. Guess why? Well, they had this page-long procedure within their manual telling home users how to replace the saw blade in the saw bench, and it said in a very um, polite and British way, before attempting any of the above, the power should have been switched off. Obviously, knowing that this user may just have lost his hand, it's not very helpful that we have been very polite to him. I think he would have been more grateful to see a warning at the very beginning of this paragraph, making sure that he's going to keep all his hands while trying to and limbs while trying to operate this product. So documentation again is about getting important messages across and dispensing with formalities.
Hmm. Do
Okay,
you think that
so
there's a reason for that? Why that was mentioned at the beginning, or is that just a common thing that you see? People forget to put those needed details where they should be at the beginning.
um, It could be absent-mindedness. Um, yeah, it could come as an afterthought, which I'm sure at least 50% of us technical writers out there are guilty of, that we write instructions and sometimes the steps came as an afterthought, so we conveniently add it towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, I
So
mean,
quick, yeah.
go for that. I was to say, I think that, for the next one, for those who need kind of a checklist, maybe it seems like you've got a little bit of a technical content checklist for us quickly that you wanted to
Yes,
go through.
so a few things I need to stress that your information has to be complete. It doesn't mean that writing in simplified English means that you give yourself this authority to cut your sentences shorter. You have to make sure that still sentences may be shorter, but the information top priority is to keep the information complete,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that it's accurate, concise. So doing away with the dead wood, cutting out unnecessary words. It has to be convincing so that you continue to engage your audience and not make them feel like chucking away the user guide, for instance. Um, your description has to be relevant based on the topic and not bring in additional information that you don't need at that point in time. Keeping the use of words, the choice of words should be meaningful and unambiguous. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So if we move on to a little bit of the roots, trying to trace the roots of STE. Where did it come from? So it was not a very new idea. Actually, the ancient Greeks already thought about that. Not just a modern thing. So obviously not simplified English, but simplified Greek. But to make it language independent, we call it controlled language. So it basically means you limit the number of words, number of choices you have. You limit the level of flexibility that the language user, to say the writer or editor, has. So the ancient Greeks already they realized that they have to be especially careful about the verbs that they use. Why is this also important? Because few people speak their native tongue with 100% accuracy and 100% correctly. So
Sure
it
can.
makes sense to limit the language to the level that only the writer, but also not only the writer, but also at least most of his readers are going to be comfortable with. So fast forward to the 1930s, realizing this in the 1930s, and this played, by the way, an important role in World War II as well. An important initiative was Basic English, where BASIC stands for business, academic, scientific, industrial, and commercial. Basic English, it's a very nice acronym. I really enjoy it. It meant really a limited vocabulary, limited syntax, with the purpose of getting general interest information across with only about 800 words in the core vocabulary, allowing, for example, Polish soldiers and pilots to operate their aircraft with based on the English language, of course, with the required level of confidence. So it was not a new idea in the 1970s, early 1970s, when the federal government proposed an initiative known as Plain English to basically communicate information with the public to make it easier for communications with the public, making it easier to understand. Because knowing that many people in the States, they have English only as the second language, and Spanish is probably the first mother tongue. And then even for those who have English as the first language, that they may not have had a very high level of education. So it makes a lot of sense that complex information, if necessary at all, should be conveyed in a very easy to understand way. Actually, some parts of the US Navy require English to be written in at a level of language fluency commonly to be expected from high school kids age 14 years. So it
Mm-hmm.
means not writing sentences that have more than 13 to 14 words, amongst other things. So plain English serves many different purposes. It is required for pharmaceutical, it's required for government, communications, business, and also information such as traffic violations and also information about your tax payments. So people may not like the message across, they may not like the message, but at the end of the day, you get the message across, and then at least they will understand it, and there's no excuse not to pay taxes or fulfill your traffic fines on time. So
Yeah. The government wants
yeah,
to get paid, so they want to communicate clearly, right?
yeah.
Also,
So
I mean,
it's
it's not just people that it seems like who have English as their second language that have a lack of familiarity with some of the terms and wanting to get around that. It seems like English speakers in general in the U.S., you know, um, I think that they're at a seventh or eighth grade reading level. So this is kind of a commonly needed thing, not just those people that aren't as familiar
yes.
culturally with English.
It's also very interesting because my government, like yours, wants to make sure that they get paid. So for really most of the time, the de facto language here is in English.
Hmm.
But if it's really, really important information like paying off taxes and when, how, where do you file them, they would make sure that everyone gets it in four languages. So four national language types: Tamil, Malay, English, Mandarin Chinese.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean,
So
where are we at today with STE then? Where did we get our
so
most recent iteration of it?
so I want to bring us back to the 1980s when
Okay.
ECMA, which is really French acronym for the European Association of Aircraft Manufacturers, they first established that there were problems with scheduled maintenance for aircraft. That basically language became an obstacle to performing maintenance adequately, competently, and efficiently. If English is the strong side of some technical writers, it is a problem in itself because if you as a writer have a very profound knowledge of English language, it makes it very likely that you will use words and syntax that are going to be difficult to understand for non-native speakers. So
Hmm.
both for those who struggle with English and for those who excel in English, it makes sense for the ECMA, the association to try and standardize the language and try to make it easy to understand for a global audience. So in 2004, ECMA was renamed ASD, so that's a little bit of a historical background. Simplified English became Simplified Technical English, and this explains part of the confusion that I introduced to you before. It also has the official designation ASD STE
Hmm.
100, and it started off as a specification for aircraft maintenance documentation. However, in the next slide, you will see
Isn't just for
that
aerospace defense.
yes, so many industries outside the aerospace have seen they have seen how this standard makes a lot of sense also for them, and that includes a very diverse range of industries that include uh, machinery, IT, medical equipment, consumer products, and even banking. So this is just a snippet of what our customers' profiles look like, just to bring home the point that it's not really something that you limit for
And so a quick question
A&D.
as a follow-up to this, because obviously
Yeah.
other industries are using it. A question from our audience, Bojan, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Is there any STE specific manuals or standards for these individual industries? Is there anything specific that STE does for the IT or electronics industry that it wouldn't do for
Yes.
the aerospace industry?
And it basically, the answer is yes. And it basically, we started seeing this trend already in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
We make use of STE as the core to teach the language to people in IT, people in medical equipment, and also people who make sports equipment. So our approach is that we make use of the STE as the core and then do some slight customizations to the specification, supposedly like highlighting which rules are more relevant to a particular
Mm-hmm.
industry, for example, IT, and which words they can use as their own unique set of terminology. So there is no STE does not impose any restrictions on which words you can use because it wouldn't make sense. If you come from IT and you're working on a specific project, then how can we decide for you what words to use? But STE does provide the guidelines on how to select all these words.
Mm-hmm.
So
And maybe
yes,
there's some.
there are definitely specific case studies that we can provide at any time if you when you write to us. We just have a limitation as to not being able to provide all of that because we sometimes have confidentiality agreements in place.
Sure. Do you, just out of curiosity, another industry-specific question, healthcare, do you know of any um, healthcare-specific STE guidelines?
As I've said, the guidelines don't change, but when
Hmm.
these healthcare customers come to us, uh, we guide them using the specification to
Ah,
rewrite their own document. So, for example, recently Medtronics in Holland, they are working on catheters,
hmm.
the tubes that go
Hmm.
into your heart area to do
Hmm.
some cardiac operation through the leg. So things like that. Uh, we can also apply STE to that, and of course, we will hold their hands for
Hmm.
the first 2 days, and after that, we make sure that they're good to go.
So
Hmm.
just to touch on what you said earlier, and I think that this is kind of the answer that the audience was looking for. It seems like there are certain, fundamentals or rules within STE that might become a bit more applicable depending on the industry, or things that you need to emphasize depending on the industry that you're working within. And so maybe because you're going to make yourself available afterwards, if anyone has any questions related to a specific industry, that you could respond to that offline, afterwards.
Yes, I just wanted to slightly correct you, Eric,
Oh,
is
sure.
that the rules are industry independent.
Sure.
The rules are industry independent. The only thing that I can think of is that the specification only provides examples, mainly in the maintenance, repair, and aviation field. So it still has that aviation flavor to it. And that's where we come in to help people convince people that actually, even without the approved and non-approved examples that have this aviation flavor, we can still make use of your documents to provide you with good working examples.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So shall we move on to
Yeah.
what
The
STE
next slide here
is?
is about the framework. It seems like we're getting into like what exactly comprises STE from a nuts and bolts perspective.
Hmm. Exactly. So in the next slide, I'm going to try to define STE. In the next slide, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
Hmm. So if you ask me, what is the STE framework? Describe it. There are many answers to this. I'm not going to give them all, and you're always welcome to discuss this further during the Q&A session if you like. But one answer is it's a set of 65 writing rules. Now, this is very important, very similar for many companies, especially what larger companies have in place. It is often known as the corporate style guide. Much of the corporate style guide will tell you which words to use, which syntax to try and avoid. So those 65 writing rules, many of the rules will be quite familiar to professional writers and editors. However, I want to stress this, that it is not the rules themselves that make simplified technical English unique. One aspect that makes Simplified Technical English rather unique is the fact that it is a very balanced and rather complete set of rules. It was not based on the preferences of just one or two people within the organization, but a whole committee that has developed the standard. Some of them linguists, some of them engineers, some of them airlines. Some of them are operators, some of them are manufacturers, and some of them are from the MROs. MRO stands for maintenance, repair, and overhaul guys. So many different people with different views. Some of them native English speakers, some of them native English speakers of French, German, Italian, too bad, not Mandarin Chinese yet. So, and they established over the years that these writing rules made sense and allowed them to rewrite any of their existing documentation based on these rules, making their documentation easier to understand while maintaining accuracy and validity. So, I wanted to talk very quickly on the technical names since this question came up also that STE does not specify terminology. However, it does contain um, a core vocabulary of about 930 words. And this makes it really different from
Mm-hmm.
corporate style guides because the 930 words, they let you write almost everything that you need for technical documentation, even for procedural information in general. Basically, these are the words that glue your product documentation together. It's like the cement or the glue. Um, I said that STE does not impose terminology on the customer because you are free to use terminology that is appropriate for any given audience. So we cannot be too specific about that. However, the basic thing is that when you are selecting your terminology, you make sure that within a given context, you're only adding one word for every meaning, that the words we choose only have one meaning and one word, one meaning both ways, no
Mm-hmm.
word with more than one meaning and no more than one word for any given concept.
Really reducing the
Mm,
ambiguity there.
yes, and so for the general vocabulary we spoke about, it's also a list of non-approved words. So not just the 900 plus words that you have. There is a list of 1,000, slightly over 1,300 words that are non-approved words. So because people uh, I'm smiling because I always have to try to put this on a very nice plate and dish it out to my audience without them grumbling too much. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to explain why, because people have been using words for a long time already and they have been writing documentation for many, many decades, if not centuries. So if many words have become very established, yet we don't want people to use them anymore, we will actually include them in the dictionary, mark them non-approved, and provide one or more possible synonyms to make this is going to be very helpful for the writer who is transitioning from standard English to simplified English because it will provide him with the ideas that will be difficult to think of all by himself. So we have also, like I said, for your own terminology, guidelines on how to select those words, and you don't have to worry that you will lose many of your technical terms or nouns and verbs because in 98% of the case, you don't your bill of materials will remain the same. So simplified English allows for this, and you will not have to do away, thankfully, with your product specific terminology.
Mm-hmm.
However, STE is there to help you regulate and filter this.
So you want to talk about how that happens? I mean, specifically from the
Um,
aspect of reducing the cost and confusion.
because it will be, I hope that the examples afterwards will shed more light on
Okay.
this so we could quickly move on since we are running a little bit tight on time. So if you look at STE, you can predict it a little bit. How? Because of this standardization, it's going to help you achieve a number of benefits. We become more consistent on the word level. That starts with the simple fact that we're going to use the same word whenever we refer to the same thing. So that means an improved level of consistency. The same happens to sentence structures or phrases. Also, if you have a scatter team like 3 writers permanently employed in the US, a few content writers in Singapore, and another team in Japan, all of them contribute to the same content. Some of them are professional writers, others could be engineers, it doesn't matter. They all fish from the same pond, they have the same rules and the same words to use and
Mm-hmm.
apply. Although it's not going to completely eliminate the differences between their writing styles and characteristics, but it is going to go a long way towards standardizing and making sure that we can put those different parts of the documentation together to get a consistent manual and result without the need for rework or editing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so, a very important also, but not so much recognized benefit of STE because everyone is so caught up with savings costs, translation saving
Mm-hmm.
cost savings. cutting it short. No, one other important benefit is that it provides accurate information to your reader. It is not just the fact that language is easier to understand for the reader, but actually content becomes more accurate because validation is easier. If you now present a standard English text that is rather sloppy, rather complex, at least to a subject matter expert, chances are, especially when stress levels are high, he will say something along the lines of, "That looks about right." Now, in simplified English, there is no such thing as about right. It is either true or false.
Hmm.
Mm, correct or it's wrong. So the validation process becomes much easier. It is also just about impossible to write anything vague in simplified English. So we are going to present information to the reader that is more to the point and more accurate, more reliable, and that is a great, very great benefit all in itself. Now, moving on to the next few points, because we still in the previous, yeah.
Sorry about
So
that.
now, because we have fewer words to choose from and our syntax is highly regulated, we will use the same sentence patterns over and over again. It means our text becomes more repetitive, meaning that if we have two similar sentences, very similar in content, they are very likely to follow the same pattern with maybe just one or two words that are different. So basically, this is basically it's one of the elements that contributes to facilitating reuse, improving the efficiency of content management, making it easier to create a piece of information once and reuse it several times based on objective criteria and based on trying to keep product specific information separate from general or generic information. As you may have heard this several times before, cheaper, faster, and better. We believe that the general rules of the game is that if you can only have two out of three, but we
Hmm.
believe that with STE, there is with the prerequisite of STE, you can have all three at the same time because you start at the source, you read the benefits multiple times once we get to the translation stage, and there is less ambiguity, more consistency. So yeah, so making it possible to make things cheaper, faster, and better all at the same time. So
Yeah, well, it's great
moving
that you
on.
can get all three of those and not just two out of three, which is, I mean, usually the case. What do you think about transitioning to the rules? Just kind of show the folks a little bit about
Yes,
specifically what these rules apply and how we can get a
yes,
sense of what it
let's.
looks like to work with SDE.
Okay, so as I said, there are 65. Actually, I sometimes say that there are 65 and a half rules, but if you want to know about those, I'll refer you to a training session. But basically, all the rules have the same characteristics. We have a rule, we have an approved example, and we have a non-approved example. The most important rule that I can think of in simplified English is the one that tells you to only use approved words. And simplified English tells us that we should shun the word to inspect. It tells us rather to use the noun inspection or the verb to examine. So okay, so the second example here that you see, examine the heat exchanger for damage, that makes sense because examine is a very specific way of inspecting. It is inspecting by looking at something, looking for something specific. But what about this visual inspection? Is it really so much better to say to do a visual inspection rather than to visually inspect? The next slide.
Sure.
So arguably so, but I think it becomes much clearer in this sample here. It came from a Boeing 747 manual, maintenance manual, by the way. So many times they like to use this fake verb, like as with to Google for a word, fluorescent penetrant inspect. Of course, you're not going to find this in any dictionary. Try translating this into Japanese. It's impossible. Many languages, they don't allow for this. And especially for people with English as a second language, it can be very, very difficult to digest. And also, we are interested in consistency. So, okay, we could potentially still get away with fluorescent penetrant, but how about when we do an ultrasonic inspection or a non-destructive inspection? Would it be in the next slide, as you will see? Would it be to fluorescent, to infraredly inspect, or to ultrasonically inspect? very awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Non-destructively inspect, too weird. So what is the advantage of using the noun inspection? It is the fact that no matter what type of inspection you will do, you can always fall back on the same sentence structure. Do a fluorescent penetrant inspection, do an ultrasonic inspection. Only the word in front of inspection is going to change, and it helps to save a lot of cost, both in creating and especially in translating your documentation. And because this phrasing is going to become familiar to users, to readers of your manual, it will take them less time to digest the sentences, and they will just get your message more efficiently and more accurately.
Yeah, certainly what it comes off to me is it's just awkward, those first examples, right? And I can imagine it's just a harder task to ask, any translation service, whether automated or human, to try and take that from the original form into something. The examples that you had definitely seem like the awkwardness was
Yes.
the thing that cleared up the most when you applied those SDE rules.
Hmm.
So you have another example for us, it looks like in the medical device example.
Yes, so I have two pieces of text for you. So the right and the left, they represent the same information. One of them is in standard English, and the other one, it's in simplified English. Up to you. I'll give you like 15 seconds to figure this out. Tell me which one could be simplified English and which one is standard English.
Well, I'm gonna play, the audience member in this case. I'll be the embodied voice of our audience collectively. Uh, but it seems like the one on the right is going to be the SDE applied one, just because it's shorter. Is that a fair assessment, or I know that you don't feel
Well,
like shortness is necessarily key in this example.
no, shortness is not, is definitely not, but it's a good guess, I would say,
Okay.
Eric. But I'm not going to go too much into detail about this text here. I just wanted people to get a flavor of what STE could do for you. And yes, the right-hand side, on the right-hand side, that is text that is written in simplified English. And probably to the trained eye, you see that simplified English, it is shorter, it is more direct, it is more to the
Hmm.
point, and it does away with unnecessary information, and it uses simple words.
Yeah.
So
It just certainly seems that looking at the last example for system operation, just press the desired button. You've cut out all the needless words in
yes,
the right version of that. To operate the system, touch the correct button. So it's way more direct and to the point.
and also we do away with complex verb formation like must be able to do, must be able to be moved. So imagine you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words to simply illustrate the verb to move. So that's really something that, yeah. Okay, so moving on, I'm sure that when we're talking about your mother tongue, your first language, a lot of questions come up from customers. We get feedback from customers. Some people love it, some people hate it at first, some people took a little bit more time, maybe one training session to like it. So how do you feel about this, Eric, after looking at the example? What is your impression of STE?
Well, I mean, I kind of shared this with you offline, but I think it's fair to say that SDE seems a bit less colorful, less personality, and you kind of spoke on it a little bit earlier on with, describing the English language as very rich and having a lot of different word
Mm-hmm.
choices. So we take advantage of that, right? We use a lot of different words where we don't need to. And so it almost, in contrast, having that structure in place where it reduces your words, um, it seems robotic. It seems a little bit less
Yes.
personality like.
And I think you also complained that, if I'm not wrong, that creativity was seems to have been sacrificed. But
Totally, sounds like
actually,
it.
it's really not the case because STE requires the writer to be more flexible, more creative. Because think about this: you now have limited, if you now have a limited budget, you need to think about more creative ways to spend your money below your means, right? So with a limited vocabulary, you need to be more creative. You need to have more consideration for your audience, as well as for specific rules that were designed to make your job more efficient. And that is not to say, yes, not to say that it's easier. So I admit that not 100%, not all writers are able to do STE. Only about 90% do. And what they actually find is that their job becomes more interesting as compared to being on autopilot, where you just need to
Mm-hmm.
churn out chunks of text and to complete your work without giving it much thought and consideration.
Mm-hmm.
You will get more interaction. That's where the creative element comes into play. Interaction with engineering or subject matter experts in general to actually establish those details that would easily have been overlooked in standard English. So standard English, because it lets you be vague and more or less convincing. Now, vague and convincing in STE, you really have to choose between the two.
Yeah. Well, I
Hmm.
mean, I think that structure is great. Dozuki here, we love structure, the constrained environment. But when you get people those constraints, it gives them structure. It gives them a way to kind of, frame how they go about doing their job. And it sometimes inspires creativity and creative thinking. But I can see someone was really flowing through the content creation process if they had this structure to kind of always guide the way that they chose their words. I know you've got some examples here. We're going to pick some examples from our parent company, iFixit, specifically looking at an iPhone 5C replacement process. Because we're kind of heading towards the end of the time, maybe we can just fly through this and you can pick out the highlights of each one of these examples.
Okay, so if we take a look again, it's the same idea, having standard English on the left and simplified English to the right. In the next slide, you see that I've highlighted awkward areas that could have been better. So for example, take the word crack. In STE, crack is defined as a technical noun. So if you use it as is cracked, then you're basically using it as a verb or as a past participle. So we try and avoid that in STE. And also, if you notice that the sentence on your left is, it may not be very obvious to the Americans or to native speakers that the sentence on your left sounds very colloquial, and it may not be something that is neutral enough for a non-native speaker to understand. So we simply rewrote this by saying to prevent more damage and also possible injuries, rather than to say bodily harm or to contain the breakage, for example. And also, again, tape is really a technical noun that you use instead of turning it into a verb. I know we're all guilty of this, to Google for a word, to Pokemon for monsters on your phone screen, something like that. So turning nouns into verbs is something that we're all used to, but it's really a bad habit that you need to shed.
Yeah.
So I'll just
So
quickly, yeah.
Well, real quick, I think that this is a great example, just so that the audience knows. You have other examples that they can refer to in the slides after the presentation, so that they'll have the same kind
Definitely.
of breakdown. And
Yes,
I'm sure that you'll be available for questions, any kind of
for sure,
specifics that they
for
have
sure.
about those examples. But I think
Yes,
that what people really are going to want to see is really this slide here that talks about
yes,
when you embrace STE, what are those results? What do you expect to see after you fully commit to using STE as part of your documentation?
exactly. So we did not take a case study out from aviation and defense because we have plenty of that. We did this check on a text that was from the previous medical slide example that you saw, and realized that the cost savings that in STE, what you can see is that the number of words will be smaller. In general, you are seeing like 20 to 25%, sometimes much more, up to 80%, but that's
Wow.
really an exaggeration. It did happen maybe once or twice, okay? But in general, we can say that about 25% of the words in our text are redundant, so we can do away with them. And if I have a manual that used to have 10,000 words, we are going to be left with 7,500 words from now on. Now, this of course goes a long way towards reducing translation costs, not just by 25%, because most translators charge by the word, but good translators nowadays use translation memory. That basically is a piece of software that, like a database, whenever you translate a sentence as a translator, that sentence along with its translations are going to go into this database. And if you come
Hmm.
across the same or very similar sentence again, the translation memory is going to suggest the previous translations. and a good translator will pass on at least part of that benefit to his customer, and that means translation costs will go down by at least 35%. Now, if you translate into 10 languages, multiply 35% by 10. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely STE pays for itself. Um, and also, we're going to have fewer iterations, fewer change cycles, less rework, fewer corrections to perform, and we have therefore a faster time to market. Um, and in general, it's very difficult to put a finger on this, if any exact figures. We avoid a lot of communication issues, such as
Mm-hmm.
unnecessary calls to the help desk because documentation is unclear. So for people who like diagrams more than text, as in the previous examples, you see here the slide. It gives you a very good overview of the number of unique terms, the translatability, and overall volume of the text that are affected by the use of simplified English as compared to standard English. So you see that also the text in simplified English is easier and faster to translate, and also your volume would have been reduced by about 25%, and readability in this case improves by roughly 42%.
Yeah,
So
so
in
it
the
seems like
next,
there's across the board all these great benefits, reducing volume, reducing the terms used, the variability of the terms, increased translation. So kind of regardless of where your pain point might be, odds are you're going to get some benefit from embracing STE. So what
yeah.
about, if say someone is intrigued by this concept of STE, what can we do to kind of help them on the path towards, being successful in their own company?
Yes, if you wanted to implement simplified English, it would be worth considering the following elements as you see on this slide. So I'll start off with the first one, that's dictionary building. So why do you need a dictionary? Because it's important for you to include words that you need to
Hmm.
describe and deal with the word that you need for your product. So something as simple as engine or power plant for an aircraft, anything in the chemical field, in banking, it doesn't matter. Those words need to be documented before you can accurately use them and write valid simplified English. And simplified English is not rocket science,
Hmm.
but some training comes in very handy. Um, so how do you normally build a dictionary? It is something that you do not do on the fly as a writer. You need someone who has knowledge, possesses some knowledge about this process, and especially one who has the right tools. So what would normally be done is text mining on existing legacy documentation to find company-specific terms that have been used in the past and decide if those terms will be included. So the term candidates will be filtered by a terminologist to see which ones are valid,
Hmm.
which ones are invalid, and then which terms have the same meaning. And normally you can expect about for a 10,000 page, for a 5,000 page manual, you could expect to end up with somewhere between 1,500 to 3,000 industry specific words. And once again, I have to stress this: simplified English, it stands and falls with the dictionary.
Hmm.
It stands and falls with the use of approved words. So if you do not build your dictionary well, then you can forget about using STE effectively. So once your baseline dictionary is in place, you can easily maintain it. Every new project, even a new chapter, it's going to require a new word or two, and it's easy to maintain, but you need to get your baseline in place properly. In place in order to get started properly.
So it sounds like that's the real heavy lifting, at least initially, is building up your dictionary. What is there any resources or anything that can make that any easier for a person trying to get started?
Yes, I think we will be answering one of the questions from earlier on. There is
Hmm.
the issue 6 of the ASD STE 100 specification. Drop us an email and we will register you and have a copy of that sent to you. There are a few resources that get you started also on ste100.net. You try to get an understanding of what kind of consultancy and support that you need, and from there you decide on the next steps. And then we also have a website that's called ste100 solutions, It contains many industry examples that we have done for our customers over the past 10 to 15 years. And from there, you get a good feeling of whether STE is really for you or for your type of industry. Of course, there is also our company website where we frequently share information about workshops and then on our webinars. And there's also a frequently asked question library, and of course, blog articles that are freely available on our
Hmm.
website for your reading. There's also an important support community on LinkedIn. We own like three of the largest STE user groups, so there is a very friendly community, especially surprise, surprise, it's from the aviation and defense field. Very friendliest community that I would encourage you to join, even if you're not from aviation and defense. And finally, you can always come to us for a complimentary compliance check. We can do like 4 to 5 pages of your documentation and let you know uh, how it compares to before and after applying STE.
Hmm. It seems like training is going to be a really necessary part of embracing STE and getting sent off or started correctly. So I'm sure that you
Yes.
guys offer training. So what do you guys do with your customers typically?
Okay, so because it's really a very thick book, the specification is really a
Hmm.
very thick book to try and chew down and digest. So, and there are also some common pitfalls that you can definitely use some help. So, some guidance in dealing with those rules, how to correctly and efficiently, effectively apply them. Normally, for native English speakers like yourselves, we would estimate 2 days of training. First day would mainly be theory, some standard exercises, and second day would be more likely a workshop,
Hmm.
practicing on your documents and learning how they change and hopefully improve by applying STE rules. So hopefully no fewer than 5 people, no more than 10, because it's good sometimes to have different and sometimes conflicting views. So
Yeah,
if you have more than 10 people, however, we are worried about diluting individual attention and guidance to the attendees.
totally
So,
understandable. Yeah.
yeah, we will syntax, vocabulary, and terminology are all covered by a good training course. And if there is software to be used, it shouldn't teach you so much how to deal with the software, uh, how to deal with the menus, because they are pretty easy to operate. The problem is more how do you use a checkers effectively, not being misled or governed by the software, but making it an effective assistant in order to rewrite, write, and update your documentation most effectively and accurately. So in the next slide, I just wanted to um, of course, there is also consultancy. I've talked about this. I just wanted to pinpoint on the third one, SDE continuous improvement. We believe in the process of continuous improvement, and it's very much associated with what you have at Dozuki Kaizen. It's a Chinese word as well. It really means to
Hmm.
continuously add positives to your work. So as like an incentive for our customers after training, we normally would offer them like a 6 month support. So making sure that after they get the training, they start writing in STE and then come back to us, give us their feedback, and then we can still work with them for the next six couple of months or so to make sure that they are diligently on track. Because
Hmm.
most people tend to fall along the side. I mean, they kind of wither away after
Yeah.
training. They're happy with their certificates, but no, how do you, that is what we really offer to
Yeah,
our
if you want it to take
customers.
hold, you have to have a support and system in place, someone that's going to be there to continually ask
Exactly.
you and check in with you. That totally makes sense.
Yes.
So, some last parting thoughts maybe about
Uh,
Shufrans TechDocs
yes,
and
about my company, our company, Shufrans, we mainly focus on applying international standards to improve documentation processes. Clearly, simplified English is our main expertise, but we are also heavily involved in technical writing, multilingual documentation, creation, and management. So, moving on to the last slide. I would like to thank you for your attention and your interest in today's session. Also, pointing out that you're always welcome to visit our website or contact us by email. If you have any questions and comments at all, feel free to contact us. And that having been said, I would like to go back to Eric and his team at Dozuki, Michael, Jairo, Leslie. Thank you all. And thank you, Eric, for moderating today's session and allowing us to share this background of ours. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much, Shumin, for being our special guest today. Hopefully, you guys in the audience learned a little bit about STE, Simplified Technical English, and maybe got excited about maybe taking that home to your company and applying it. Hopefully, you found some resources, or at least were pointed in the direction of some resources. Again, just like Shumin mentioned, she's available. She's made herself available via email if you'd like to follow up, you have any questions. She's very helpful. If you're looking for, again, those industry-specific examples
It's
or
all on our
pre-prepared
website.
lists, yeah, she'd happily direct you
Yeah,
to where
I'll just
the
point you
resources are
to.
on her
Yeah.
website, or if you'd like to reach out to her directly. If you're not finding that, by all means, reach out to her again. It's Shumin at shufranstechdocs.com, and we'll again provide that information in a follow-up. Lastly, for anyone who wasn't able to join us, if you have colleagues that would prefer to see this in a downloadable version, we will make that available in the next couple days, probably at the end of the week. So look out for that. That also will be a little bit higher quality as opposed to streaming online. So that will be sent out to anyone who registered to attend to this. With that, we are so thankful for having Shumin today.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much again,
It was
Shumin.
my pleasure, really.
Yeah, appreciate it once more. We'll let her get off, and we look forward to seeing you at the next time at Dozuki Workshop. Take care until then.
Thank you.